Injustice can exist even where justice is served. But if you think a judge has absolute power in his courtroom, today's story will make you think again. The courtroom was packed to the brim. The air was thick with murmurs, tension simmering just beneath the surface. Reporters scribbled frantically in their notepads, their cameras flashing intermittently. On the elevated bench, Judge Marcus Graves sat with an air of authority, his dark eyes scanning the courtroom before locking onto Pam Bondi, the defense attorney standing at the podium. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose, an expression of disdain creeping onto his face. "Miss Bondi, I hope you understand that this courtroom is not a stage for theatrical performances." Pam Bondi remained unshaken. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly, her dusty rose suit crisp, her demeanor unflinching. She placed both hands on the podium and met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "Your Honor, I am here to uphold justice, not to perform." A smirk played at the corners of Graves' mouth as he leaned forward, folding his hands together. "Then you should do a better job. So far, your arguments have been nothing short of laughable. Do you really believe you can stand here in my courtroom and convince the jury with mere conjecture?" Pam's eyes narrowed slightly. She did not rise to the bait. Instead, she reached down, opened her leather briefcase, and retrieved a thick file. She placed it neatly on the podium before lifting her chin. "Not conjecture, Your Honor. Facts, and I will prove it." A chuckle rippled through the back of the courtroom, where the prosecution team sat with arms crossed, amusement evident on their faces. Some of the spectators smirked, others whispered among themselves. But Pam remained unfazed. She had prepared for this moment. Every step of this case had led her here, and she would not falter now. The air inside the courtroom grew heavier as silence settled over the crowd. Judge Graves tapped his gavel lightly, the sound echoing through the high ceilings. "Very well, Miss Bondi. You have the floor. But I suggest you refrain from wasting this court's time with baseless accusations." Pam tilted her head slightly, a slow, deliberate movement that conveyed both confidence and determination. She stepped away from the podium and turned to face the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we all stand here today under the belief that justice should be blind, that it should be fair, and that no man or woman is above the law. But what happens when those entrusted to uphold the law use it as a shield to cover their own misdeeds?" A murmur swept through the courtroom. Pam let the words sink in before she continued. "For months, I have investigated the disturbing inconsistencies in this case. At every turn, I encountered resistance, silence, and carefully constructed barriers designed to conceal the truth. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it is buried." She walked to the prosecution's table and placed the thick file down with a controlled thud. The lead prosecutor, Richard Lawson, raised an eyebrow but remained silent. Next, she turned back to Judge Graves, her voice steady. "Your Honor, do you know a man by the name of James Weller?" A flicker of something, perhaps irritation, perhaps recognition, flashed in Graves' eyes, but his expression quickly returned to one of indifference. "No." "Next question." Pam reached for the file, flipping it open with calculated precision. She retrieved a single sheet of paper and held it up for the courtroom to see. "That is interesting, Your Honor, because according to this financial statement, $500,000 was deposited into your personal account 3 days before James Weller was acquitted in a high-profile corruption case. Would you care to explain?" Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. A woman in the back covered her mouth in shock. The jurors exchanged glances, some leaning forward in their seats. Judge Graves' grip on his gavel tightened, his knuckles turning white. "Miss Bondi, you are treading on very dangerous ground." "No, Your Honor, you are. And this is only the beginning." Judge Graves shifted in his seat, his usual air of dominance slightly rattled. He narrowed his eyes at Pam, his voice laced with irritation. "Judge Graves, this is an outrageous accusation. You have no real evidence. A financial statement proves nothing." Pam Bondi walked back to the podium, placing both hands firmly on the wood as she stared him down. "Perhaps. But a financial statement coupled with a witness testimony, surveillance footage, and a direct money trail linking you to Weller? That, Your Honor, is what we call undeniable proof." Silence. Pam pulled a USB drive from her pocket and held it up for everyone to see. She turned toward the courtroom's large screen and inserted it into the connected laptop. Within seconds, a grainy video appeared. The image showed a dimly lit private lounge. At the center of the frame, Judge Marcus Graves and James Weller sat across from each other, shaking hands. A thick envelope was discreetly passed between them. A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Graves' face turned a shade paler. He clenched his jaw, his fingers pressing into the arms of his chair. "This proves nothing. This could be any meeting. That could be anything." "Really? Because I have an expert forensic team ready to testify that the audio analysis confirms your voice, and the bank records will show that the transaction coincides precisely with this meeting." She turned back to the jury, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence speaks for itself. The man who was supposed to uphold justice has manipulated it for his own gain." Judge Graves slammed his gavel down with force, his composure slipping. "Enough. This is an abuse of process. I will not allow this courtroom to be turned into a circus. No, Your Honor. What you will not allow is for the truth to come to light. But it already has." As the weight of her words settled, the door to the courtroom swung open. 2 FBI agents stepped inside, their presence sending a ripple of unease through the room. Judge Graves sat frozen, his lips pressing into a thin line. Pam Bondi glanced at them, then back at Graves, her next words deliberate and unshakable. "This is far from over, Your Honor." The scene fades to a hush, the gavel trembling in Judge Graves' grip, as the entire courtroom braces for what is about to unfold. The air inside the courtroom was thick with an unsettling silence. The FBI agents remained at the entrance, their eyes locked on Judge Marcus Graves. He had not moved, his fingers clenched around his gavel as though it were the only thing keeping him steady. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. The jury exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to doubt. Pam Bondi stood tall, her presence unwavering. She let the tension settle before speaking, her voice measured and precise. "Your Honor, I urge you to tread carefully. This court values integrity above all else, and right now, every eye in this room is on you." Judge Graves exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. His voice was lower this time, almost a growl. "I will not entertain baseless accusations." "Baseless? Then let us delve deeper, shall we?" She turned to the prosecution's table and picked up another document, flipping through it before holding it up for the jury to see. "Ladies and gentlemen, here is a sworn affidavit from an anonymous whistleblower within Judge Graves' own chambers. This individual has provided testimony that, on multiple occasions, they witnessed meetings between Judge Graves and high-profile defendants under questionable circumstances. These meetings took place in private residences, exclusive clubs, and on at least one occasion an offshore retreat owned by none other than James Weller. A few gasps echoed through the courtroom. Graves straightened, his eyes narrowing. This is an invasion of privacy, a blatant violation of legal ethics. Legal ethics? That is quite an ironic statement coming from a man accused of selling verdicts. The murmurs grew into outright whispers. The jury, now visibly unsettled, shifted in their seats. Graves opened his mouth to retort, but Pam raised a hand. "I am not finished." Pam took a few deliberate steps toward the screen at the front of the courtroom. She pressed a key on her laptop, and another video appeared. The footage showed Graves sitting in a dimly lit restaurant across from James Weller. The timestamp was mere days before Weller's verdict was announced. The video had no audio, but the body language was clear. Weller handing over an envelope, Graves slipping it into his coat pocket. "Now, Your Honor, you previously stated that the earlier footage proved nothing. But what about this? Is this also meaningless?" Judge Graves gritted his teeth. His fingers twitched, but he held his composure. Pam clicked another button. The screen changed again. This time, it displayed a series of emails, communication between Graves and a network of individuals linked to multiple controversial acquittals. She highlighted a specific message dated just 2 weeks ago. This email was retrieved from a secured server. It details a conversation in which you confirmed the amount of $500,000 would be received in exchange for favorable rulings. "Do you deny that this is your email address? This is ridiculous. How dare you? How dare I? No, Your Honor. How dare you? How dare you stand in this courtroom, the very place meant to uphold justice, and exploit it for personal gain?" The courtroom erupted into chaos. The gallery was in an uproar, the reporters scrambling to take notes. The jury members exchanged looks of disbelief. Judge Graves slammed his gavel down violently. "Silence. This is still my courtroom. Not for long." A smirk ghosted across her lips as she stepped aside, gesturing toward the FBI agents still standing at the entrance. "Because the people who truly uphold the law are here to take over." The lead FBI agent, Agent Thomas Carter, stepped forward. His voice was firm, commanding. "Judge Marcus Graves, we have obtained sufficient evidence to issue a warrant for your arrest. You are under investigation for corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice." Judge Graves rose to his feet, his gavel slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the desk. His face darkened with rage. "This is an outrage. You have no jurisdiction over me." Agent Carter signaled to his team. Another agent stepped forward, a pair of handcuffs gleaming in his grip. "Actually, we do. The Department of Justice has been watching you for months, and thanks to Miss Bondi, we now have the final pieces of evidence we need." Pam Bondi turned to Graves, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Justice is not a game, Your Honor, and it is certainly not for sale." The moment hung in the air as the agent stepped forward. Graves' hands clenched into fists, but he had nowhere to go. The weight of the evidence was crushing. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the cuffs were snapped around his wrists. "This is a setup, a trap. I will not go down like this." "Oh, but you will." As Graves was led away, the room was alive with a storm of reactions. Some gasped, some whispered. The jury, shaken but resolute, sat back in their seats, their expressions unreadable. Pam stepped back to the podium, adjusting her suit jacket. The case was done, the battle won, but she knew the fight for justice was never truly over. Ladies and gentlemen, the truth has been revealed. The law is blind, but it is not weak. And today justice stands victorious. She turned toward the gallery, meeting the eyes of the people who had gathered, those who had doubted, those who had feared. And in that moment, she knew that this case, this victory, would send shockwaves far beyond these four walls. Justice had spoken, and it was deafening. The courtroom was in utter chaos. Journalists whispered furiously into their microphones. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances, and the gallery erupted into a cacophony of gasps and murmurs. At the center of it all, Judge Marcus Graves stood frozen. His once commanding presence had crumbled, replaced by an eerie stillness. His lips parted, but no words came out. His hands, once so firm in delivering verdicts, now trembled slightly. The FBI agent stood just a few feet away, cuffs at the ready, waiting for the inevitable. Pam Bondi took a slow step forward, her gaze locked onto Graves. She could see it in his eyes, the calculation, the desperate search for an escape. But there was none. Your Honor, no, Marcus Graves. The law has spoken. Judge Graves finally found his voice, and when he did, it was hoarse, almost primal. This is a setup, a politically motivated attack. You think you can humiliate me like this? I have allies in places you cannot even fathom. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She simply raised an eyebrow and gestured toward the screen, where the damning footage still played on loop. Graves turning his back on justice. Graves accepting the bribe. Graves selling verdicts like commodities on a market floor. Allies? You mean the ones already scrubbing their hands of you? Look around, Marcus. There's no one left in your corner. He turned his head sharply, scanning the room. The prosecutors averted their eyes. The jury members who once feared him now looked at him with pity, or worse, disgust. Even the bailiffs, men who had worked under his command for years, stood unmoving. Judge Graves clenched his jaw. He took a step back, then another, before gripping the edges of his podium as though it were the last solid thing in his world. I demand a mistrial. This is an unlawful proceeding. Pam Bondi. Oh, you misunderstand. This isn't a trial. This is your reckoning. The courtroom door burst open, and a second team of federal agents stepped inside. They wasted no time in advancing. The lead agent nodded toward Pam before looking directly at Graves. Marcus Graves, you are under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and bribery. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The sound of metal clicking filled the room as the cuffs locked around Graves' wrists. The once feared judge let out a strangled breath, his face contorted in fury. You will regret this. You think this is justice? This is nothing but a sham. Pam Bondi leaned in, her voice calm but cutting. No, Marcus, this is justice, the kind you can't buy. As the agents escorted Graves out of the courtroom, the crowd erupted. Some spectators cheered, while others simply sat in stunned silence. The gavel that had once symbolized his power lay abandoned on his bench, forgotten and useless. Pam watched as the doors closed behind him. She exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling over her. Justice had been served, but the fight was never truly over. She turned toward the press section, where journalists were already crafting headlines. A reporter raised a hand. Ms. Bondi, how do you feel about bringing down one of the most powerful judges in the country? I didn't bring him down. He did that himself the moment he betrayed the law. I simply revealed the truth. She gathered her files, straightened her suit, and walked toward the exit. As she passed by the prosecution table, an older attorney nodded in respect. You've made history today. History is only worth making if it changes the future for the better. She stepped through the courtroom doors, leaving behind the echoes of a fallen empire. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Protesters, supporters, and onlookers all waiting for the verdict of the day. When they saw Graves being led into a waiting black SUV, handcuffed and defeated, a wave of voices rose in reaction. Pam stood at the top of the courthouse steps, looking down at the sea of faces. She took a deep breath before speaking. The law is not a tool for the powerful to manipulate. It is a shield for the innocent, a sword for the righteous, and a force that cannot be bought. Today is proof of that. The crowd roared in agreement. Camera flashes lit up the scene. But let this also be a lesson. Corruption doesn't thrive in the dark. It thrives in silence, in fear, in the belief that no one will ever challenge it. So let's make sure no one ever forgets what happened here today. Justice is only real if we fight for it. She turned, walking toward her car as the weight of her words sank into the crowd. People murmured amongst themselves, some inspired, some wary, but all affected. As Pam Bondi's car pulled away from the courthouse, the city skyline reflected in the glass, a symbol of the battles still left to fight. Justice had won today, but tomorrow was another day. If you believe in truth, justice, and the power of standing up against corruption, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There are more stories like this, more battles to be fought, and more lessons to be learned. Click the next video to uncover another shocking case where the system was challenged and justice was served. Justice isn't given, it's earned. Subscribe now. Watch next video.